Assassin's Creed Unity is a really weird game to talk about in 2024. When it first came out, Ubisoft had really high expectations. I mean, this game was coming off of the success of Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. It was the first game on the next-gen consoles of the time, which was the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. But unfortunately, the game came out in a completely bugged and busted state. The amount of memes that came out of this alone just put a huge black eye on not only the franchise, but kind of Ubisoft too as a company. But as time has progressed and Assassin's Creed has kind of shifted genres away from more action adventure to a historical fantasy RPG, a lot of people are looking back at Unity specifically with rose-tinted glasses. And I mean, that's incredibly easy to do when you get on TikTok or YouTube Shorts and you can see these short clips of these badass parkour animations of people just running around the rooftops of Paris, pulling off these really impressive assassination animations. But I kind of feel like people are just looking at it with rose-tinted glasses, and they're basing this entire game based off of 10-second TikTok clips. While if you look at the game in its entirety, there are some major issues here as far as I find the story to be incredibly boring. And with the parkour, while it has incredibly impressive animations, it still falls into a lot of the same pitfalls that the previous games did. I guess I can understand that the whole vibe of this game and the tone was going for that more cramped urban environment as you're a hidden blade in the crowd, silently picking off your targets and then being able to climb away. But I want to really look at this game, like I said, in its entirety and kind of draw a conclusion of what it looks like almost 10 years after its original release. Starting off with Paris, it is honestly a really interesting choice for a setting. For me, a staple of the Assassin's Creed series is putting me in a historical sandbox. Put me somewhere that I don't really know a lot about and let me get to learn about it through climbing around and stabbing people. I played this game on an Xbox Series X, and I think with the frame boost and the auto HDR, it honestly still looks really pretty. It's a bit blurry because I believe it runs at 900p, but I still thought the visuals held up really well. I mean, the architecture of Paris alone is fantastic. I think this is the first game where they really started making buildings and things like that have a realistic size and scale to them, to where like if you're scaling up the Notre Dame Cathedral, it takes a second because the church is huge. And I don't know if this is true, so don't hold me to it, but I believe a couple years ago when the Notre Dame Cathedral caught on fire, they used some parts of Assassin's Creed Unity to help model because it was such a realistic and honest recreation of that space. But I think that cathedral is like a perfect representation of what this game nails with its city structures. It's beautiful, it's gothic, it's dense and detailed, and you just love running around on it. Not to mention they made Paris insanely dense. There are so many people just walking around the streets. But I will say this is also where you can start to see some of the seams with the older style design and just the hardware that the game was hamstrung at the time. There is a lot of repeated NPCs in this game wearing the exact same suits and the exact same hats and stuff like that. There's actually probably like 6 body models and maybe 10 different clothing models, and the game just kind of switches those in and out. Not a huge complaint, but it is something you'll notice if you pay close attention as you're running around. But like I said, I think this city is incredibly cramped, but in the best way possible. It's what makes the game fun to run around. It's why you can get on social media and see all these really impressive clips with these super clean animations of people hopping on beams and jumping in and out of windows, which, by the way, I have to say that is something that I think Assassin's Creed needs to bring back, which is incredibly dense cities with both indoor and outdoor sections, because nothing is more fun than running across a rooftop, jumping down through the window, running through a fancy building, going out the window on the backside. It creates this incredible sense of motion that is just unrivaled in any Assassin's Creed game to date. Speaking of which, let's go into detail a little bit more with the parkour. I think it is very good, but not perfect, and honestly, I think it works 70% of the time. I think what really holds it up is all the fantastic animations that are done on it. Everything looks super duper crisp as Arno kind of flips around things and have these really exaggerated leaps from one edge to another. That, and they give you the ability to now scale up and down as you're moving. As you know, you hold the trigger to sprint, hold A to go up, hold B to go down. It kind of feels, or at least gives you the idea that you have more control. Because before this, a lot of the times, if you didn't have a hay bale to jump into, you kind of just had to leap and hope for the best. Hope you didn't take too much damage or that it wasn't too high, or kind of awkwardly jump down. But now you can kind of smoothly work your way up and down environments, and it honestly does make for a better feeling game. Now, the issue is that sometimes the game feels very floaty with its parkour, and it looks like old school wire work. It's not like a huge knocking point, but it is something I noticed, so I feel the need to say something about it. But then you also still have those same problems that you have in every Assassin's Creed game, where you cannot get your character to scale the damn wall like you want them to. You'll run out a wall that very obviously looks like you can scale, but then you just kind of run up a little bit before you fall back down, when there are obviously handholds you should be able to grab. Or let's say you're on a wall and you want to side jump to the other one to then scale up, and your character for whatever reason just cannot register that they can jump to the left and switch their position on the wall. It's little simple things like that that aren't huge, but they do stop the motion in its tracks, and it's not something that they've ever been able to figure out with any game. And maybe it's one of those things I just need to accept that it will never be perfect, but still, I just don't love the narrative that the parkour in this game was perfect. It just was very, very good, but it still has the same issues from the previous games. They just managed to make the presentation a lot cooler looking. Speaking of looking cool, I honestly think stealth has had a huge upgrade with this game. For the first time in the series, there's a dedicated stealth button. And what I mean by that is you just crouch, but still, you would think in an Assassin's Creed game, by now you would have a more dedicated stealth system where you can crouch, use corner covers and stuff like that. And I believe the cover system is very similar to like the Division and some of the Splinter Cell games and things like that allow you to kind of scoot around and hide from people. But it also gives you the opportunity to do really cool things like the corner assassinations, or yank people over a box and you can just stab them and hide their body. It's little things like that that the series has really missed out on, and it sucks that they don't really have that a lot going forward. They have it with Syndicate, of course, but after that, when the series changes, a lot of the stealth work is just hiding in a bush and stabbing people as they walk by. And I miss like the more interior environments where you can kind of scoot around, sneakily stab people, kind of like an actual assassin would. And the stealth isn't perfect. A lot of times the enemy sightlines can be very weird and you feel like an enemy shouldn't be able to see you, but they do. But hey, it's a video game, it's never going to be perfect. I will say, the use of the hidden blade and the stealth animations in this game are the best in this series, and what I'm talking about specifically are the assassinations. The way you can just walk by someone and with a flick of the wrist slice at their throat, or if you're running at full speed, you can kick their leg out from underneath them. You can grab their neck and swing them around onto the ground and stab them. I played so much of this game just sprinting around and trying to see all the different animations I could get because they were so clean and so fun. And as a personal anecdote, I remember in high school when this game first came out, me and my buddies playing it and loving the animations so much, we would run around the school trying to pull them off on each other. And I can't believe we didn't get in trouble as we're holding pencils to each other's throats and I'm kicking knees out from underneath people trying to pretend to assassinate them. But you gotta love the imagination of high school kids. I will say, I loved the addition of the Phantom Blade. It's a lot similar to like the blow dart gun from Assassin's Creed 4, but I think is a little cooler. You have a literal crossbow attached to your freaking wrist, and it's just super fun and satisfying to be able to pull off these little thwips as you're nailing somebody in the head with a dart. Speaking of killing people, let's talk more about the combat. I think they really tried something interesting with this game. A common complaint that I had with the other previous Assassin's Creed games, while the combat is fun and the animations are cool and you feel like a deadly assassin with a blade, it really doesn't push back against you. You can very easily counter, and the counter timer is very forgiving. Like, you don't even really have to try. The moment you see somebody swing, just press B and you'll nail it. And it almost at times felt like it was just an automatic kill button. They changed it up, and you could tell they took a lot of inspiration from fencing because swords are a lot heavier. There's a heavy clash as you're really parrying at the right time. And also, you can't just one hit kill people a lot of times because of how the gear system works. If you have a sword that's the same level as the enemy you're fighting, you're going to have to hack away at them a couple times. And again, here's where some of the animation work comes in, and it looks very cool, but it doesn't always add up and stuff like that. And it's not a huge deal, but again, it is something I noticed. I will say I really enjoyed the combat overall though. I had a lot of fun considering it was a little more difficult and it was a little more weighty, and yeah, as you got better at it, you may be able to get into a fight with a huge group of enemies, but most of the time you had to really pick and choose your fights. And if you had too many enemies coming at you at once, it was really difficult, or you had to really focus up, or it was going to be hard to get out of your situation alive. Unless, of course, you had the consistent series cheese, which is smoke bombs. Smoke bombs are still super overpowered in this game. You can just throw one down and start hacking away at enemies and nobody can see you. And that's of course common for all the games. I mean, I think I've talked about that in several videos before, where if you get in a fight with two enemies, throw a smoke bomb down and just start hacking away. And before you know it, you can at least thin the herd by 3 or 4 guys, and then you can take on the rest. And I kind of go back and forth over if that's something they should change or keep, because I do like the idea of a stealthy assassin using some sort of smoke to obscure the enemy, which of course would give you the hand if you're fighting a bunch of guys. Overall, I really enjoyed this change in the combat. I kind of wish they would have kept it. I liked the weightier, slightly more difficult approach. Let's change gears a little bit, but still talk about killing people. And let's cover assassinations. I remember it was a big marketing point with this game where they talked about their black box mission structures. Basically, the idea is you have an assassin target, there are going to be multiple ways to enter, multiple ways that you could pull off the assassination, and the choice was yours of how you conducted it. I think at the time that this was made, it was impressive. But if you look at the current landscape of games where you have stuff like Dishonored, Hitman, and things like that, it really feels antiquated in a lot of ways. There really aren't many different ways that you can pull off assassinations. There are pretty much very specific and scripted ways that you can get unique quote-unquote assassinations, but it really isn't open-ended in the way something like Dishonored is. If I were to remake this game, let's say, I think it would be smarter to take a Dishonored approach, where yes, you have to kill your target, you can't get out in a non-lethal way, but maybe have a high chaos way, a low chaos way, or a ghost kind of way where you can get out in and out unseen. You could some way create chaos, but that really kind of looks bad because you're not following the tenets of the creed, of course, or some different variation of in between that. I think it would just add to the replay value and actually make a difference in how good of an assassin you are. But I ultimately think a big problem with this game is the fact that I never really cared about the people I was assassinating. In Assassin's Creed 2, you wanted to go after the men that had killed your father. And in this game, I couldn't really care less about the people I was assassinating, so I wasn't really invested, and I didn't really care how I pulled it off that much. Yes, there were a couple cool ones, but for the most part, it didn't really matter because I didn't have any stakes into what I was doing. Now let's talk about the side activities that you can do in Assassin's Creed Unity. The pair stories are pretty cool. Now, for the most part, you're doing the same thing, which is just going from place to place and attacking people. Now, I don't mean to really boil it down that much because I get that's what you do in most games, but they didn't do a great job, in my opinion, of creating interesting context for what you're doing in the mission. Occasionally, it was fun, like for instance, somebody's making wax molds of people who've been beheaded on the guillotine for sale, and you have to go kill the people who have been stealing those fake heads. Or maybe Napoleon Bonaparte wants you to go investigate a guy that he thinks his girlfriend is cheating on him with. And those are fun, but for the most part, they're pretty hit or miss. And I think this might have actually been the first time that I did all of them. And I think that was because I was having more fun just actually playing the game and hitting those checkboxes and clearing off the map. Because I do have to say, this map is a fucking mess. It is insane the amount of icons. It's obnoxious. And honestly, it's just painful to the eyes because it borderline just makes you want to slam your head against your controller looking at the filth of icons on this map to where you don't really even know where you should be going. You have to really cycle through all the icons and turn different things off to even make sense of it at times. But as far as other side activities you can do, they have murder mysteries, which are like these really cool detective pieces where you're trying to solve a murder. And some of them are pretty cool. They all kind of involve the same thing, which is you go into an area, you use your eagle vision, you interact with the gold icons, and you kind of have to read through all the little descriptions that you get. I will say there were some pretty cool ones, like trying to figure out who was poisoned at a tea party and things like that. And it really just involves you gathering this evidence, maybe going to a couple different locations, and then you take that evidence and you can use your own brain or just look it up on YouTube and kind of figure out who done it. And that could be fun at times. They weren't always great, but there were a couple memorable ones that I enjoyed. And the payoff is cool because each one of those gives you a unique weapon that is pretty fun to use. I will say, I did all the Nostradamus enigmas in this playthrough, and it was not worth it. I think those things are just a pain in the ass. I honestly just opened my laptop, opened up a tutorial, put a podcast on my phone, listened to a podcast, and followed every single direction I could find because it is not worth the time it takes to go find all of them. And then the armor you get is really just depends on your taste, whether you like it or not. I thought it was kind of cool, but not something I wanted to wear for the entire game. I may have wore it for like one mission, but for the most part, I enjoyed all the other equipment you could get. And speaking of equipment, I really love the RPG aspects in this game specifically. There have always been RPG aspects in all the Assassin's Creed games with weapons that do more damage and you can get armor and things like that. But this game really took that up another notch, where you have basically a full kit of armor, whether it be boots, belts, tops, gloves, and a hood. and you can change them out to change your stats, change how many items you can carry and things like that. And they really do kind of change how you play a little bit. Like if you want to go with the medieval armor, you're going to definitely have more health, but you're not going to have very many tools. You're going to run out of smoke bombs, you're not going to have many lock picks and things like that. I very much always went for a more stealthier approach. I always had lots of tools on me, lots of smoke bombs, lots of cherry bombs, lots of ammunition, and most importantly, lots of lockpicks. And this was so I could sneak in and out of areas, and if I got into a fight, throw a smoke bomb and either run away or kill everyone. And I just found that to be more fun, and I found those items were aesthetically more pleasing. It also just gives the player the opportunity to really style out their Arno how you want them to look. And that's something I will always be a fan of. Let me make my character as cool as I want to make them. Oh boy, let's talk about co-op in this game. Now, the co-op I have a love and hate relationship with. I thought it was an incredibly cool idea. And I remember when the game came out, it did feel special. I remember having some pretty cool interactions with people online doing missions with just complete randoms. But the issue is anybody that you're going to get linked up to is pretty much way over leveled at this point, and they're just going to drag you through the mission, so you don't really get to enjoy it how it was intended. But the problem is a lot of the missions were intended to play with multiple people, so it's very difficult to do by yourself until you're over leveled. So you can go in and kind of handle the fact that you can't really stealth your way through a lot of these missions because of how enemies are designed in rooms and in courtyards and things like that. The issue is, the big reason that you want to do these missions is to get the special gear that is tied to those missions. But if you're having to go back and play the mission with over-leveled armor, that armor that you're going to get for that exclusive mission is basically useless at that point because it's 1 or 2 levels lower than what you need at the time. It was really not the best design choice. I think maybe they should have tied it just to like colors for your armor or something like that. It just made it a mess. I think it was their way of kind of trying to force people to play with others, or a way to incentivize players, which is smart, I understand that. But I ultimately thought it was a misstep, and it really affects the game in the long run with its replayability. There's also really bad synergy between the actual co-op missions as far as canon and the regular story. Like, it's not really clear what takes place and when, because the last co-op mission, which is the hardest, actually takes place at the beginning of the revolution, when the actual game itself ends at the end of the revolution, and it just doesn't make sense. They should have found a way to better work these into the actual story itself. That way there is both mechanical gameplay reasons that you want to play these missions to try to get the gear, as well as story things so you can get more context of what's going on. But a lot of these missions are actually pretty cool. Like, you have one where you're fighting in a tournament, you have another one where you're supporting a women's march, you have another one where you're trying to stop an execution. They're actually pretty well designed for the most part, and I enjoy doing them, and contextually they're fun and interesting. But I just think they didn't do a good job of making it to where you could play by yourself, which I know is kind of like the co-op missions. But still, my point is, most people aren't going to be playing these games with other people. These are primarily single-player games, and these should have been made with more of that in mind than putting so much emphasis on that multiplayer component and kind of hamstringing people into it. Now, finally, I want to talk about the story of Assassin's Creed Unity. I spoke at the beginning about how you could tell they wanted this game to be the next big thing. They wanted this to be the Assassin's Creed 2 of its time. There's an insane high-budget cinematic presentation throughout. There's incredible sweeping cameras. There's ridiculous graphical detail, especially to fabrics, the way coats move and flicker in the wind. And like I said, I think the setting is really cool. I don't know a ton about French history. That's admittedly a blind spot. And while initially I thought that may hurt my enjoyment to the game, I actually think it worked in its favor. I found myself more engaged trying to learn about this time period. And this kind of speaks to how they set up the Assassins and Templars. I believe this is the first time in the series that we see both organizations at their peak. I mean, the Assassins have a huge freaking awesome gilded cave where they're training initiates. And up to this point, Assassins in a lot of the games are a lot scrappier. I mean, yes, you kind of rebuild the organization in some of Ezio's games, but you have to do those throughout the game. You don't join when the organization is already at its peak and at a really good place. And they also do a good job of folding these organizations and their structure into the current day politics, with the way that the leaders are trying to achieve peace and kind of avoid the revolution, because they know there's going to be a lot of blood and turmoil and chaos that comes from that, and it won't be good for everyone. I just thought it was a really interesting place to put both groups and to try to do something different than what we've seen in the games in the past. Now, to get into specifics, I could tell they really were trying to create another Ezio with Arno. He's that classic roguish type character. He's charming, or at least attempted to be charming. He attempts to be witty. He has a lot of humor and stuff like that. But he just doesn't hit any of the notes that I need him to do. I didn't find him charming or captivating enough to care about him and what he's going through, which ultimately makes the rest of the game fall flat. And then they have the idea of the romance between him and Elise, which is smart because you take Paris, the city of love, you do like a whole Romeo and Juliet thing where she's a Templar, he's assassin, and it just doesn't work for me. I don't find that they had any chemistry whatsoever, which makes me really not care about their relationship. It didn't matter what happened to them. It didn't matter to me if they achieved their goals because I didn't care about them individually as characters or them together as a couple. And that was the main problem with the narrative to me. And this leaks over to the villains. I can't even tell you the name of the villain of this game, and I just played it. I just remember he was a sage, and that he was a reincarnation of Jacques de Molay, but I didn't really care about what he was doing. So if I don't care about the protagonist, I don't care about the antagonist, I don't really care about most of the middle characters, who am I supposed to care about? There is no one to care about, and therefore what happens in the game didn't really matter to me. The only reason I stuck around so long was because I did enjoy stabbing people, and that's a failure on the narrative aspect. And in the past, they've done a good job of creating some memorable villains. I mean, the entire Borgia family was pretty memorable. Haytham was a very memorable character. So I know they're capable of making compelling, memorable villains. They just weren't able to do that here. Overall, I think the story was a pretty big miss. It was pretty mundane, pretty boring, and honestly kind of forgettable. At the end of the day, Assassin's Creed Unity is really held up by its production value. It has incredible animations, it has some really awesome design choices as far as dedicated stealth, and I think in a lot of ways it speaks to the spirit of what Assassin's Creed should be as far as it being social stealth, the blade in the crowd, stabbing somebody and walking away and nobody having a clue as to what happened. But the game isn't perfect. It has a really boring story and nothing for me to really latch onto besides the gameplay. And I think Assassin's Creed has done a really good job about me caring about the people I'm playing as. And that's one of the big reasons why, while I think we can look at this game for inspiration as far as social stealth and the hidden blade in the crowd fantasy, I don't think this game is the perfect thing that people kind of make it out to be, like it's the last great Assassin's Creed, because it's not. It just had really compelling and good parts of it. But again, that's just my opinion. I'm curious to what your opinions are, so please hop in the comments below and tell me, do you love Assassin's Creed Unity? Do you hate Assassin's Creed Unity? Tell me yes, no, give me reasons why. I can't wait to hear from you all. And as always, thanks for watching.